The man touched the dead woman's forehead, then slowly brought his fingers to his mouth as if tasting something from them. Next, he examined the woman's lips. The tape marks on them proved that this was not an ordinary drowning case. Just 2 hours earlier, a cruise ship carrying U.S. Navy personnel and their families had been blown up by a car packed with explosives. The blast killed more than 500 people instantly. The entire dock was now piled with bodies waiting to be identified by their families. Yet among them, there was one woman who stood out. Aside from severe burn marks across her body, the fingers on her right hand had been cleanly cut off. There were also signs of beatings across multiple parts of her body, and traces of eucalyptus oil used in bomb making were found on her. The medical examiner confirmed that she had already been dead before the explosion. Clearly, she had been murdered and her body dumped there. But when Detective Doug looked at her, he felt a strange sense of familiarity. He had the unsettling feeling that he somehow knew the victim, and the more he looked at her, the harder it was for him to bear. But the case at hand quickly pulled his thoughts back. The killer had most likely tried to disguise the body as one of the bombing victims, which meant he must have known in advance that the explosion would happen here. It wasn't hard to deduce that he was very likely the mastermind behind the bombing, and after checking the records, the police discovered that the car loaded with explosives actually belonged to the dead woman. In other words, solving this murder would also solve the cruise ship bombing. Soon, Doug identified the familiar-looking woman. Her name was Claire, so he went straight to her house to investigate. But the moment he walked in, he noticed letters arranged on the refrigerator that clearly formed a warning message, leaving Doug momentarily stunned. Then he continued searching for clues. In the sink, he found bloody clothes and bandages. Next, Doug played the phone messages, hoping to find some useful hints. There were messages from a close friend and one from someone asking about buying her car, but the final message froze him in place.
This is ATF Agent Doug Carlin returning your call. My cell number is 504-555-0130.
The message was actually from Doug himself. It turned out that Claire had called the police station looking for him before she died, but at that exact time, Doug wasn't there, so a coworker had written down the number. When Doug later returned, he called the number back and left a message, but he was absolutely certain that at that time, the two of them had never met. Clearly, the complexity of the case had already gone beyond his jurisdiction, so Doug handed the evidence he had gathered over to the FBI and explained that finding Claire's killer was the key to solving the bombing. A senior FBI official was impressed by Doug's ability to track down clues, but just as Doug was about to leave, he spotted a familiar car. It belonged to his partner and best friend, Larry. The official hesitated before telling Doug that his partner had also died in the explosion. Doug's heart sank, and he couldn't accept it. Larry had said he was going on vacation, so how could he have ended up at the bombing scene? Seeing Doug immersed in grief, the FBI agents invited him to join a special department. The bombing was the first case their department had been assigned since it was formed, and they urgently needed someone with Doug's sharp instincts. Determined to find the person who killed his partner as quickly as possible, Doug immediately agreed. Soon after, they brought him to a secret facility. It turned out that this department possessed a piece of advanced technology. By combining data from multiple satellite surveillance systems, they could reconstruct past events. They could review everything that had happened within a specific area, and even switch between different viewing angles. However, because of the enormous and complex data involved, generating the reconstruction required 4.5 days, and once it began, it could not be rewound. In other words, they only had one chance to watch the footage leading up to the explosion 4.5 days earlier. They needed Doug to help them identify targets and find useful clues. But Doug was curious. He could understand the satellite images, but how were they able to record sound as well? At that moment, the scientists refused to reveal any more information, and Doug didn't press further. Since the system could only review events from 4 days earlier, and the cruise ship had such massive crowds, finding clues there would be extremely difficult. It would be better to start with Claire. So Claire's life from 4 days earlier was completely reconstructed and displayed to everyone. But after watching everything, they still didn't discover anything valuable. Yet when Doug watched Claire, he felt an indescribable emotion. At that moment, Doug's coworker called and said they had found a large number of Doug's fingerprints in Claire's house. The coworker even joked that Doug must have forgotten the basics of handling a case, but Doug clearly remembered that he had been wearing gloves. There was no way he could have left fingerprints. Just then, the Claire in the footage seemed to sense someone watching her. Doug thought the killer had appeared. He immediately switched camera angles to check the surroundings of the house, but there was nothing unusual. Had Claire somehow discovered the surveillance? But the FBI insisted the system was strictly one way, so Doug Doug continued searching for clues. Soon, they noticed that the phone call about buying the car seemed suspicious. The caller had managed to get Claire's address, and technicians quickly traced the call to a public phone booth. However, the booth was outside the system's surveillance range, so they had to retrieve nearby security camera footage. Unfortunately, it only showed a blurry silhouette, but Doug carefully noticed that the man's bag might be the key. Using a recognition system, technicians compared it with bags seen on the cruise ship, and they eventually identified the suspicious person. Although the face wasn't clear, they now had the time and location. In just a few hours, they could use their advanced technology to lock onto the suspect. But at that moment, Doug had a bold idea. He took out a laser pointer and aimed it at the surveillance screen. Something unbelievable happened. Claire in the footage actually saw the laser beam. Immediately afterward, the equipment in the room began malfunctioning. It was obvious that everyone there had been hiding something from Doug, and he demanded an explanation.
Now, you want to tell me what the hell this thing is? It's not surveillance, Paul. It's not electronic thermal imaging.
Realizing they could no longer keep it secret, they finally came clean. The system wasn't simply surveillance. It was actually a space-time connection similar to a wormhole, and the images on the screen were literally the past. Doug had no interest in understanding the complicated science behind it. He simply asked, if a laser could be sent 4 days into the past, why not send something else? For example, they could send a warning about the upcoming bombing, but the scientists insisted that doing so would disrupt the order of time.
For all of my career, I've been trying to catch people after they do something horrible. For once in my life, I'd like to catch somebody before they do something horrible, all right? Can you understand that?
Everyone fell silent in thought. Eventually, they decided to take the risk and try sending a piece of paper. So they sent information about the killer to Doug 4 days in the past. As the machine powered up, half the city's electricity supply was affected. Fortunately, the note was successfully sent. But unfortunately, on that day, Doug had left work early and never saw it. Instead, his partner Larry found the note. Larry went to the location mentioned on it, intending to arrest the killer. But the killer fired first and shot him dead. Everyone watching the scene was stunned into silence, and Doug finally understood everything. In the original timeline, the killer had planned to use his own car to transport the bomb, but because they had sent the note through time, Larry encountered the killer earlier and was killed. The killer's car was also left with bullet holes, making it impossible to blend in with the cruise ship traffic, so the killer turned his attention to Claire's car. In other words, although they had changed the timeline, the outcome had not changed. Fortunately, they had already identified the killer's identity, and the police quickly arrested him. Doug went to the prison to question the killer about his motive. The killer revealed that he had applied to both the U.S. Navy and the Army, but had been rejected by both. Filled with resentment, he wanted to prove his worth through the bombing. At the same time, he believed everything he had done was simply fate, and he didn't think he had done anything wrong.
I told you earlier, I have a destiny, purpose.
With the killer's confession, the case was officially closed, but Doug couldn't accept this outcome. Just a few days earlier, Claire had still been alive, his partner had still been alive, and the 500 people on that ship had still been alive. He wanted to save them all, and the most likely way to do that was to send himself 4 days into the past. The technicians warned him that if the transmission failed, only his cold corpse might appear in the past, and he might even end up facing his own body. But Doug didn't care. All he wanted was to save everyone. When the machine was activated, half the state's power supply was drained. Inside the machine, Doug's body began to distort. When he opened his eyes again, he found himself lying in a hospital bed. He realized the transfer had succeeded. He immediately disguised himself as a hospital employee, grabbed a police officer's gun, then stole an ambulance and drove straight to the killer's house. Meanwhile, the killer was preparing to burn Claire's body. During her struggle, Claire scratched his face, and in anger, he punched her, knocking her unconscious. Noticing his blood on her hand, he decided to cut off her fingers to destroy the evidence. At that critical moment, Doug crashed his vehicle straight into the scene. He successfully distracted the killer, but was also shot by him. Taking advantage of the moment, the killer ran outside and shot an oxygen tank, causing flames to instantly fill the house. Believing the two of them were surely dead, the killer quickly drove Claire's car toward the docks. What he didn't expect was that Doug managed to rescue Claire.
You're safe, you're all right, okay? I'm a federal agent, you're safe, you're safe.
Saving Claire meant the risky time jump had started off well, but the killer wouldn't give him much time. Doug had to reach the docks as soon as possible to stop the explosion. However, on the way there, Claire noticed Doug's wound was bleeding heavily. If it wasn't treated soon, he wouldn't last long, so she suggested stopping briefly at her house to bandage the wound. But the moment Doug walked in, he already seemed familiar with the layout of the house. He rearranged the letters on the refrigerator to spell, "You can save her." Doug knew that if he failed this time, another version of himself would eventually come. He wanted to leave a message message for himself. At that moment, Claire finished changing. Seeing the outfit she was wearing reminded Doug of the first time he had seen her, lying in the morgue. So he asked her to change into something else. Claire was confused, but did as he said. But when she came back out, she was holding a gun.
Stop right there! Don't move! Don't move! I'm calling the police.
I am the police.
No, you're not.
Yes, I
No,
am.
you're not.
Doug's familiarity with her house had clearly made her suspicious of him, so Doug told Claire to call the police station to confirm his identity. After receiving confirmation, Claire finally lowered her guard. Still, she was curious about what was really going on, but Doug didn't know how to explain his presence. After Claire finished treating his wound, Doug finally understood something: the bloody bandages previously found in Claire's house, and the fingerprints everywhere that his coworker had mentioned. It all meant that this wasn't the first time he had been here after traveling through time. Once everything was ready, the two of them headed to the docks. There, they spotted the killer preparing to leave. Doug immediately decided he would defuse the bomb while Claire went to notify the police. But unfortunately, just as the killer was about to leave, he noticed his own car and realized the two of them were still alive. To ensure the bomb wouldn't be destroyed, he immediately ran back onto the ship. Claire saw everything clearly. It was obvious there was no longer time to call the police, so she jumped onto the ship herself to warn Doug. But the moment she got aboard, the killer captured her. A patrolling guard tried to make the killer leave the cargo hold, but the killer turned around and emptied his magazine, shooting the man who tried to stop him. At that moment, Doug quietly approached and saw Claire tied up. An idea came to his mind. He signaled for Claire to start the car while he engaged the killer in a psychological confrontation. Because he already understood the killer's motives, he directly spoke about the destiny the killer believed in so strongly. The killer froze in place. He had never expected someone to understand him so well.
I thought you were a patriot.
Oh, I am.
Patriotism requires sacrifice. Who are you?
It's not supposed to be this way.
At that moment, Claire received the signal and slammed the car into the killer, and Doug immediately shot him dead. Doug then jumped into the car. Seeing that only 2 minutes remained before the explosion, he decided to drive the car into the sea. But the arriving police mistook Doug for the killer, and there was no time left to explain. Claire slammed the gas pedal and drove forward. Underwater, Doug fought desperately and managed to pull Claire out of the car at the final moment, while he himself became trapped inside. As the massive explosion burst out of the water, Doug had successfully saved everyone. Claire sat on the shore, devastated. At that moment, the Doug from this timeline walked over.
How you doing? That's right. You okay?
Facing his concern, she finally understood the feelings Doug had experienced earlier. She didn't know how she could explain everything that had happened so that Doug would believe her. So she asked him a question.
What if you had to tell someone the most important thing in the world, but you knew they'd never believe you?
I tried.
When she received the same answer she had heard before, Claire finally felt relieved.